You're listening to the new WCEG Network. You can join us on WCEGTalkRadio.com by simply clicking on the live stream tab, or watch us on your smart TV, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the WCEG Network. We're also streaming now on Roku and the WCEG TV. I'm William Bill Edwards, your host for Wisdom Wednesdays. For the next hour, I am pleased to have my special guest, a person whom I've known for quite some time, who is well vested in government process and who is a dear friend. That's Mr. Darryl Hicks. Darryl is a member of the Fayette County Board of Elections and was appointed to Governor Brian Kemp's to serve on the State Ethics Board. Darryl, how you doing?
Doing fine, Mayor. How you doing?
I'm doing just great. Outside of telling people what I just told them a few minutes ago, tell us a little bit about Darryl Hicks.
Well, I tell you what, I tell people all the time, Mayor, I'm just a country boy who came to the city. I'm from South Georgia, well, Middle Georgia to be exact, in between Fort Valley, Georgia and Columbus, Georgia. Spent my time, believe it or not, my kids don't believe this, but I spent my time working on the farm, my grandfather's farm, chopping cotton, hoeing cotton. I came along after they had machines to pick cotton, but then I came to Atlanta to college, Morris Brown College, and haven't left since that time. So I spent most of my life here in Atlanta. Ironically, though, I was born at Grady Hospital. Yeah, my parents lived here and then moved back to my mom's hometown before I turned 1. So look, my focus in life, I've done a lot of things. I spent about 20 years with Atlanta Gas Light Company, AGL Resources, was an executive there, and then left to run for office twice, two times statewide. And then now I'm a financial advisor with a small boutique firm called Equity Services. Started out with Morgan Stanley. But what I'm most proud of, Mayor, is this. I spend my time, I tell people, God put me on this earth to be a bridge builder. I enjoy finding ways to help people and to give back to people, in particular with my nonprofit boards that I've served on. It is such a blessing to be able to help somebody that otherwise might not have known the information or might not have had the information to help themselves. So been married. Last Saturday was 34 years for me. 3 kids, two daughters and a son. My son is my older daughters have graduated from college, and my son is finishing up college. And so I spend my time serving where I can, Mayor.
Well, you have actually done that. You and I have crossed paths on many things in many years, and you've been. You're living in Fayette County, but you've been a lot of support here in South Fulton County over the years, and I want people to know that I didn't pick you out of the blue. Dolores didn't pick you out of the blue. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But you've been, even when I was with the Old National Merchant Association and other things, you was always there, being very supportive. It's good to have Morris Brown graduates on, because I'm proud of Morris Brown. And what Morris Brown has done over the last couple of years to gain their accreditation, and they're now having their first graduating class.
They sure are, Mayor. In fact, Morris Brown has asked me to serve on their board. So come July, I will become a trustee of my alma mater. Mine's and my wife alma mater. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's wonderful. My cousin was on the board of trustees of Morris Brown, Claiborne Edwards for many, many years.
I remember.
Before his untimely departure. But listen, let's talk about some things. This is election time. People are now starting to get their early voting ballots, especially in your county, where you have an election going on now. Me, I don't call elections out on my show because I'm not a political show. But when Darryl, I know you with the Board of Elections. We hear that term a lot. Board of Election. Everybody's got a Board of Election. What is it the Board of Elections all about? What is their commitment to the citizenry?
So every county has a board of elections, and even some counties have a board of registrations as well. They could be separate or they could be combined. Some smaller counties have just a probate judge who is basically who carries out that function. But here's the purpose of a board of elections. And I tell people this all the time, because oftentimes people will come to our meetings and sort of demand that we change things and do what they're asking us to do. Look, we are an entity that is we've been placed into existence by the state legislatures. The county has to request it, and we've been placed into existence by the state legislators. Our function is pretty simple. We carry out the laws of elections. We don't make the laws of elections, but we do have a responsibility that once those laws are in place, we are charged with, one, making sure that an election can be carried out in our county, countywide. We're responsible for making sure that the elections is fair, safe, and accurate. We also are charged with the responsibility of staffing those election workers on election day, and then ultimately counting the votes on election night. And then once the election is over, we're responsible for certifying the election and then storing those machines until we have to use them again. And then when we use them again, we're responsible for making sure that those machines are accurate, that they're calibrated correctly, and that they're accurately reporting votes. That's what we do. We carry out the function of election so that every citizen that is eligible and qualified to vote has an opportunity to vote. Their vote is protected, and that vote is counted. And then we report that information to the Secretary of State's office. So in general, Mayor, that's the function of an board of elections.
Well, a lot of times people have, we start new elections and people have to find out where they voted the last time is not where you're going to vote now. There's been all some controversy about that. And then most people don't like to have, what is it called when you, a paper ballot when you're in the wrong place, provisional ballot. They don't like that. How is that? Is that done each time there's an election, or is it done during the time where we redistrict people?
So if you're talking specifically about provisional ballots, that's done in every election. Now, the laws have changed a little bit over the years. Most people may be familiar with the process of if you go into a polling location and it's not your polling location, or you don't have your ID, or for some reason you can't cast a ballot, you can request, and you should request. The law requires us to give it to you, even if you're somebody from outside of the county. We give you a provisional ballot, and then you cast your votes. That's on an old system, in the sense that you could do it at any time, doing early voting and on election day. Once you cast your provisional ballot, then the election office, after the election day has closed, is required to then validate whether that provisional ballot is acceptable or rejected. Now, here's what happens with that. We call it the curing process. You come in and during that process, you cure your ballot. Let's say I didn't have my ID with me and I wanted to vote. So I cast my provisional ballot. After the election, I have 3 days to cure my ballot. Whether it's lack of ID, or I say I'm in the right county, or I'm in the right precinct, I can go to the election office and I can say, here's my ID. My ballot is then classified as cured, meaning that it will be accepted, not rejected. There are things you can do that you can't cure your ballot, which means that if I'm a voter in Fayette County and I want to go to Fulton County and cast my vote, Fulton County more than likely will take my provisional ballot. It depends on how much, I complain. They'll take my provisional ballot, and then they will say to me that if I insist that I live in Fulton County, they will tell me about this curing process. And then right before the votes are certified, my ballot will be rejected because I'm a citizen of Fayette County. And so that provisional ballot happens all the time. But Mira, let me just sort of tell you now what's slightly different with the provisional ballots than what was last year. The legislators passed a law that said, okay, look, before you could go and cast your ballots, provisional ballot, you can go anytime during early voting or anytime during the day of elections and do that. And your provisional ballots would go through this curing process. The difference now is this. Doing early voting, obviously in early voting, you don't have a provisional ballot from the standpoint if you're just in the wrong precinct. If you're in the wrong county, you may have one, but usually you have enough time to go back to your correct county. On election day in particular, the law now says that if you go to a polling precinct and want to cast your ballot and you're not in the right precinct for that provisional ballot, you cannot cast a provisional ballot. You have to be directed to your precinct. They will look up your precinct and say, Darryl, you're in the wrong precinct. Your precinct is X. And then I have to leave and go to that location. The condition to that is at 5 p.m., if I go to a precinct that's outside of my precinct, outside of my voting location, the law says that now you have to take my provisional ballot. You can't force me to leave and then go to my precinct. You have to take my provisional ballot, which means that you can do a provisional ballot in a precinct that's not yours after 5 p.m. and after. Mm-hmm. So the difference is before 5 p.m., now you cannot do a provisional ballot if you're out of precinct. You have to go to your precinct. And then after 5 p.m., you can do a provisional ballot. Mm-hmm. The old law said that you could do it at any time.
Mm-hmm. Some of the laws in terms of voting have changed. What is the most impactful one that you see that has made a difference in how people are voting in the future?
It is the time frame that you can ask for and receive an absentee ballot. Mm-hmm. Used to be, most people didn't know this, but it used to be that before an election, you could actually request an absentee ballot 180 days before the election. Now, it may not be mailed out until the law says that you can mail it out, usually about 45 days before the election. Mm-hmm. So now the law has changed and said that, no, you can't do that any longer. You can only request an absentee ballot 45 days before the election, and then it's only mailed out in a shorter period of time, 11 days before the election. Mm-hmm. So here's the risk with that. If you're used to the old law, you could kind of request an absentee ballot and go about your merry way. Absentee ballot would come in the mail, and then you would have enough time, as long as you return that absentee ballot before election 7 p.m. Election day, you were good. Mm-hmm. Now, the law says that you have to have that ballot. Election office can't mail it out. It's a shorter window to mail it out to voters. And then it's a shorter window for you to return it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't return it within that window, your vote doesn't count. So I think that is the biggest change for me in the history of Georgia election, modern day history of Georgia election. The other kind of change since the 2020 election that has probably impacted a lot of people is the absentee box, where you could actually go and put your ballot into an absentee box, and it was located around the county. Mm-hmm. Since the 2020 election, you now only have absentee ballot box for every 100,000 registered voters. So whereas in Fulton County, you might have had 50 of them. I don't know how many you had. Here in Fayette County, we had 4. Today, we only have 1. And that one box has to be located in a public place that is monitored 24 hours a day, which means that it's in our election office. And so now, if it's in the election office, Mayor, that means that when the election office closed, you don't have the ability to go and put your ballot in that box.
Absolutely.
In that absentee ballot box. And so now you are restricted from the hours of 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 if the office opened at 8. Whereas before you could do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The condition was, though, that it had to be under surveillance during those time periods, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
How is that rule, do you think, on a percentage basis, has affected the overall participation of voting?
Well, I think probably significantly, because there are a lot of reasons why people can't go even doing early voting. Now, most people will argue that, look, you got 21 days to do early voting. You can do absentee by mail. You can request an absentee ballot, and then you have election day. So there are those that argue vehemently about the fact that you have enough time to go vote. But the reality is this: there are people who, given even that amount of time to vote, still have obstacles in their lives that prevent them from doing it. And it's much easier if they can do it through absentee ballot. And especially if you're military and you're somewhere else. Now there's a military process, but it cuts down the window for which you can send your absentee ballots back in. And so whether you got somebody who is taking care of an elderly parent, so they can't ever get away to do that during the working hours, it is just easier to do absentee ballot. And my guess is that you've probably, I don't know the percentage. I know that AJC did an article on the effects of the absentee ballot boxes. That, whereas you may have had 60% of the people dropping their ballot in those boxes, today it may be less than 40%, less than 30% dropping their ballots in those boxes. So you can see fewer people are using it, and obviously it is probably impacting the turnout.
Well, let me digress a little bit and let's talk about, election workers.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been an issue. Cities, counties, or whatever, about having enough election workers to do that. Talk to me about, the process of election workers. What's the qualifications and things of that nature that allow you to perform that job?
So really the only qualification is, well, it's slightly different now. Used to be that you had to live in the county. Today, you can actually live in a neighboring county and do election work in a neighboring county. So I could live in Fayette and I could go do election work in Fulton County, as long as Fayette County doesn't have an issue with attracting people to work in elections. But that aside, it has always been a challenge of ours to find the right people to want to work on elections, in particular because the process happens during the working hours. So if you got younger folks that want to work on elections, they got to take time off of their job. So mostly what you have is older people, not elderly people, but you have some elderly people. But you have older people who are working the election, and most of them are females. And so you have this challenge. COVID showed it, exposed it in a great way, that if you got elderly people who are more susceptible to sickness or just aches and pains, Mayor, to be quite honest with you, is making sure that they can show up for elections on election day. Our challenge of trying to, as I said, hire young people is because young people are working. Now, one of the things that we tried to do here in Fayette County, and I know that it is the case in other counties, in Fulton in particular, because your needs are greater than ours, is that we try to make sure that the pay is commensurate enough where we can attract people that want to do their civic duty, but they can get some compensation in the process. And so we try to make sure that our pay is competitive enough for somebody to take off a whole day. to work in elections. So, and then we try to go to high schools to try to encourage, those that are older to participate. College students, if they're home doing an election process, we try to encourage them to participate as well. It really is about word of mouth education and the current poll workers helping us to recruit.
You talk about competitive pay. Is that competitive pay would be commensurate to what they would make while losing a work in a day, or how's it estimated?
So it's probably for us, it's probably somewhere around $14 to $16 an hour. So you can judge whether or not that is commensurate to, to some people it may not be, to others it may be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me draw back a little bit and let's talk about the this process of certification. Many people are familiar with that. What does that process entail when you're certifying an election?
It's a good question. So I talked a little bit about that, but let me give you a little bit more detail around it. In my conversation around provisional ballots, I talked a little bit about it, but here's what happens. There are all kinds of reasons why a ballot may not be accepted on election day, or may not be able to be put through the machine. That's just one part of it. That's that provisional ballot that I talked about. But the certification process is way bigger than just that. It is also the fact that we have one certified that we've counted every single ballot. We've certified that we've kept the cards that those ballots are on, that chain of custody, that we've certified that process have been within the framework of the law. Meaning the cards are not in anybody's hand. It's only in election workers' hands. Those cards have been turned in. Every card has been read. Every vote has been uploaded. And no machines have been tampered with. Okay, so once we confirm that, and now we've confirmed the provisional ballots, whether or not they're accepted or rejected, we then by law have to say that the vote count that we have before us is the actual vote count, and we certify that to be accurate. And that's how we get to the final vote count. We certify, Secretary of State can then take that information and declare a winner.
Mm-hmm. Well, for a long time here in Fulton County, when we've had elections, and we've done pretty good here recently in terms of handling the election process. But for a long time, we had to labor with issues of machines not being there, not working when they get there. We've had not enough machines for the precinct where we're at. And I've gone through, I guess in my years, I've gone through several different types of machines in voting until where we are now. Keeping that in mind, how good do you feel with the voting machines that we're using now? And has it helped the process become a little bit more, easier? I guess I want to say easier for voters to do.
So that's one of the things that people, in particular, citizens that are very adamant about the fact that the machines are fallible and that they're not accurate. They argue this point all the time, but here's my personal opinion on this, and my personal opinion is based on the facts that I see as it relates to here in Fayette County, and I would venture out to say that it's the same across the state. Those machines, in my opinion, is currently the best way for us to efficiently move through a voting process. In my opinion, those machines are safely guarded. Now, I can't speak to the algorithms that are going on behind the scenes, but the evidence of audits, and that's how we determine whether or not the machine is putting out accurate information. There are random audits that the law now requires us to do. Those random audits are within the standard deviation or the acceptable error rate, if you will. of what the machine should be. Here's what I mean when I say that. If we run 100 pieces of paper through 100 ballots through the machine, and we count 100, that means that machine is accurate to the extent that there's no variations. If we won 1,000 of them through there or 100,000 of them through there and 30 is missing, that means that that machine is still accurately calibrated. Much better than punching a card, trying to look the hanging chads. You remember that, Mayor, years ago at the hanging chads. This eliminates that. And then so I tell people all the time, if somebody gets into the runoff, it is highly unlikely that the results of that runoff will change. Now, I'm a living example of that. When I ran for labor commissioner in the primary election, I won by 596 votes. I was up 1,000 votes when we started the process, but I won by 596 votes. It is highly unlikely with these machines and the accuracy of these machines that the results of a certified election will change unless you forgot to count some votes. You counted all the votes and you certified that you've done that. Then I think that it is difficult to overturn an election. It is efficient. It accounts for the votes. I'm confident in that. I'm confident in the audit process. I'm also confident in the chain of custody that I don't know of any more efficient way to do elections today than what we're currently doing.
And I was going to talk to you about the chain of custody, but you know, when I go into the voting booth, I get my card, I go into the booth, I make my selection, and then the machine prompts me to make sure that those who I voted for is who I want to vote for. Then I leave there and I go to the second machine. I got to slide that ballot, and I don't know what that second machine is about, but I got to slide my ballot. And what is that just a second check on what I did at the voting machine?
So what it really does is the check and balance for you will be, you're looking at the screen, you're casting your vote, and before you close out, it confirms, these are the votes that you want to cast. It gives you a summary. And you say, yes, those are people I voted for. I'm good with that. Cast my ballot. Then what it does is print out your ballot. And then you get a chance to look at your ballot and go, yeah, it printed out exactly what I said as it relates to how I wanted to cast my vote. That ballot accumulation box that you put it in at the end is not a verification of your vote. It's a verification that your vote now was cast. Here's what that means. It goes through that scanner. And that scanner, and most people will tell you, and at least here in Fed, what the person tells me when I walk out the door is, watch this number. You'll see this number change by 1 once it scans your ballot.
Good.
And then you look at it and you go, yeah, it went from 200 to 201. So that means it counted my piece of paper. And then that box is used to store all of the ballots so that when we get through with the election process, Mayor, we then now have a box that has a seal on it, that has a lock on it, that you can't get into it. And the only reason we would go into there is to do an audit, or when everything is certified, then we now take those ballots out and secure them and store them according to the law. So that box is just an accumulation box, for the lack of a better thing, but it also helps us make sure that when we do an audit, nobody's going in that box and added 50 ballots to it, or subtracted 50 ballots from it.
Right. So back to chain of custody, I wanted to have a quick comment on that. You cast your votes, everything is done. It's time to get those machines and stuff to where it needs to be to count the vote.
Right.
Tell me about the chain of custody from that point until where it needs to get.
So the poll manager will fill out a chain. Basically, at the beginning of the process, we give to the poll manager, this is the material, and these are the boxes that we've given you. These are the memory cards that we've given you to put into those where people can use to cast their ballot. I mean, that the memory cards that tabulate the ballots. So remember, as I said, that last box you put it in, That's where your memory card is storing all of that information, a number of ballots.
Right.
So once you do that, we give them, we say, here's what we're giving you. You sign that, here's what we gave you. You take that information and you go off and you start the election process in your precinct. Every day you giving us a count of what ballots have been cast. You don't know who they voted for, but you know that today you got 270 people who have voted since early voting has started. And here's how many voted on this machine, in this precinct, and here's how many voted in that precinct. So the cards and memory is keeping up with all of that. Remember, we gave that all to you. It's now in your custody. Assuming that you don't have to change out a memory card because you got too many votes on one box, then at the end of elections, those boxes are secured by us, the election office. Early voting boxes are secured. And on election day, you go to your precincts and that starts another process. But we secure the boxes. In the end, you bring those boxes back in on election night. In that office, Mayor, you have people who are checking off, we gave you this, did you return it to us? And was it returned in a sealed way? Meaning that you had something sealed and we had to unseal it to get to it. We verify that we gave you poll manager number one, we gave you X number of ballots. We gave you, not ballots, but ballot machines. We gave you poll pads and we gave you 2 memory cards. Let's just say that. You come back, we check to make sure that you have those memory cards. We physically take those memory cards out. I'm being a little long here, but I want to make sure I cover the process.
Yeah.
We take those memory cards out and then we hand deliver those memory cards to the area where they are put into a machine and counted. Nobody else touched that but an election person. In our case here in Fayette County, our board members do that. We hand it over, they put it into the machine, and then they tally the votes. That's how you get your updates on election night. So every precinct that's coming in, whenever they come in, they're going through that process. And before they leave, they check off everything that they return back to the election office, and it matches up with what we gave them. They're free to leave. They sign a form that says that they've returned it. We've received it. They can take that with them, and that's their confirmation that they completed the election process as far as they're concerned. That's the poll manager. And then we take that information and we now have it in our possession, and that is the chain of custody. We now certify that you received and returned everything that we gave you, including the memory cards that hold the votes.
Can citizens volunteer to come in and examine that procedure if they would like?
Yeah, they can. Usually what you have is they can't go into the room where you're doing that process.
Right.
But they can view it from a distance where you're not interfering with the election process. But yes, absolutely. But here, in addition to that, each party, each candidate can have poll watchers, whether they're watching the poll results or they're watching the counting of the votes. They can assign somebody to come do that. And then here's the other thing, you may have this on your list to ask me. But when we get those provisional ballots in or the absentee ballots in, there's a process of opening up that mail and verifying this is what the person, this is their vote.
Mm-hmm.
Each party can have a representative in the room to verify that the election office didn't take my ballot and throw it in the trash.
Right.
So everybody have somebody in the room that they can validate that the process is this and the votes have been accurately accounted for.
Mm-hmm.
And so parties, candidates can have people to view that process.
Mm-hmm. Presumed, and I use the word presumed, election irregularities that's being reported. Who does it report to? I mean, from the precinct to the election office. If there is perceived election irregularities, who do they report to? Those two.
So it can start out locally, or it doesn't have to stay there. But for the most part, we educate people that, look, if you see something going wrong, you have the rights to contact the director of elections. You can tell them what's going on. You also have the rights to go directly to the Secretary of State's office, and you can file a complaint. And usually that's how it starts. If there is a perceived irregular activity going on, a person will formally file a complaint. Now, during the election day, or whether it's early voting or election day, if you see it going on, obviously you want to, if there's a real issue, you want to say something to somebody early enough where if there's a problem, it can be corrected. It doesn't take election off the hook. If they've been making a mistake, they still have to go before the State Board of Elections. But you can at least correct the problem before you go through an entire election process. So citizens have the right to file a complaint or say something to someone about it, whether they say it to the poll manager and the poll manager say it to the elections office, or they go directly to the election office, or they go to the Secretary of State. If it's valid enough, let's say, for example, that you got a candidate who's campaigning within 150 feet, and you let the poll manager know, the poll manager can go out and tell the person you have to move back 150 feet. Now, that doesn't mean that you still won't get a complaint filed against you as a candidate to the Secretary of State's office. It just means that we can stop the infraction without them doing it throughout the whole election process. And then the Secretary of State can deal with any violations of the law. County elections offices don't, we have some latitude around investigating a violation of the law, but ultimately, if it's a violation of the law, we have to refer to Secretary of State's office. And the Secretary of State office will then take it up and determine whether or not it's an infraction is severe enough that they recommend it to the Attorney General's office. So anybody can watch, anybody can file a complaint.
You mentioned candidates too close to the polling area. That's one of the biggest things we get, that they violated the law in terms of being as close as they can to the polling area, and also wearing voting paraphernalia, in an area where they shouldn't be wearing it. We get a lot of complaints about that. And I don't know what people think that, well, I saw her, she was 50 foot from the door, stop the election. But I think that's what they think sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes people, they sort of understand a little bit about the law, but not the full extent of the law. Yes, if somebody's within 150 feet, here's what I recommend. Obviously, I recommend that you report it to the poll manager, but I recommend you take a picture of it. Take a picture of it, and then if you can see they put out those little red flag, the little red signs that say you can't campaign within this distance. By the way, just for the point of clarity, that 150 feet is not necessarily from the room that you're voting in, that building. It is from the corner of the building.
Right, okay.
So you could be voting in the center of the building, which if you go from the center of the building to where the person was, they were outside of 150 feet. But if it's a school or a cafeteria or something like that, you go to the corner of that cafeteria, the building corner. Now you're within 50 feet of campaigning, you're violating the law. So people have to understand the law. But here's the other thing I'd say about the law too. Most people say that, I'll give you an example, and I'll make this quick. I remember I was called by one of my poll managers, or actually I was called by the elections director, a former election director, who said, Darryl, there's somebody at one of the precincts who's sitting down in lawn chairs, and when people come outside and after casting their vote, they're within 25 feet of the door, maybe 30 feet of the door. They're asking them questions about how they voted. Can you go out there and take a look at it? So I went out there and took a look at it. True enough, they were correct about one part. They were within 30 feet, inside of the 150 feet. But they were at the exit door, which is a difference. And they were asking people about how they voted. They didn't demand that they do it, but people could say how they voted or not. Poll workers, wanted me to call the sheriff and ask them to leave. I said, no, I'm not going to do that because here's what the law says. The law says that as it relates to exit polling, as long as they're outside of 25 feet of the exit door, not the building, but the exit door, they have a right to sit there, watch, do whatever they need to do as long as they're not interfering with the election process. And there is nothing we can do about it that is within the framework of the law. And so poll workers insisted that I do something. And I said, I'm not going to violate the law. Remember, elections is about carrying out the law, not if you like it or don't like it, we carry out the law. So
the exit door is not the same as entrance door. I mean, you have
exit door is not the same as folks coming to vote.
Right.
Cannot try to educate somebody on voting for you within 150 feet or voting for your candidate within 150 feet of the building.
Mm-hmm.
Once they cast their votes, you can ask them whatever they want as long as you're 25 feet away from the door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can ask them whatever they want. That's how people get exit polling results. They go and ask people, how did you vote?
Well, the reality of it, though, Darryl, is that some people are going to take that law and think it's from the foundation of the building.
Yeah.
To where they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, being educated about the law is critically important. Look, we're not in the business. Elections offices are not in the business of trying to stop people from following the law. Look, there are some people, and I'm one of them, who would like to see voting absentee ballot boxes all over the county.
Mm-hmm.
But the law doesn't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't happen. So most people try to implement their own law based on their limited understanding of the law. And that'll get them in trouble.
I'm gonna go out here on a limb in a minute and talk about something that's flown around the state capitol, and that's even from the Secretary of State, and that's the change of the 50+1 rule. I understand when I was commissioner and mayor, that when a person does not acquire that 50+1, then there must be a special election. But that special election is very, very costly to a municipality. I was elated to see the conversation coming up about whether we need to continue to do that or not, because it's very expensive to the government.
Right. Look, we're in a special election right now. It covers Fayette County and Fulton County. It costs us as much money to do this special election as it does a general election for the precincts that we're doing it in. And I would venture to guess, whether it's a special election or a runoff, historically, we will do good if we can get 15% of the people to come back out and vote.
Right.
But our cost is like it's 100% of the people coming out and vote.
Right.
It is a very expensive thing. Look, I think that there is value in finding a way to get people to state their choices, whether it's choice voting or it's plurality. And that's what you're referring to when you say if it's less than 51%, 50+1. It's plurality. Look, I think there's some value into doing that, because here's the thing. If you have somebody who come out and vote, early voting, they come out and vote, early voting or election day, and then you get into a runoff, people are saying to themselves, look, I've already taken one day off work.
Yeah.
I don't want to take another day. Now, look, the super voters are going to do it. I'm a super voter, so I'll go vote if you got dog catcher on there.
Right.
That's what you are too. So you got the super voters who are going to do it, but it does become a costly event for it to happen. We now have had 2 elections this year in Fayette County that has been either a special election or runoffs. So it's costly, and we're probably going to have a runoff in this one, Commissioner. If I had to guess, you got enough people in there. I'd like to see one person win, and that's not a political statement. That's just from an election standpoint. It makes it easier on the election staff. If you can have the election's over.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to going to another runoff, because the runoff will be as costly as this election, because we don't do that. Here's the other thing I'm gonna say about this too. You haven't asked this question, but the law's parameter around the number of machines that you have to have in a precinct, it is based on the total population of registered voters in that precinct. And I know it was up for, and I do not know the results from this, but I know it was talked about in this legislative session, trying to fix that, saying that you have to have 250 machines. I mean, you have to have, for every 250 voters, you have to have a machine. And so if half the people vote in early voting, it doesn't matter unless the law has changed. It doesn't matter. You still have to put in during election day for every 250 voters, a machine. Here's what that means. If you got one precinct that has, enough voters to have 30 machines in there, that's probably easy for Fulton County. 30 machines in there, but half the people have voted, you still got to have a big enough space to have 30 machines during election day when half the people have voted, 50% turnout rate.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're still dealing with that cost and that cost of those machines and having that number of machines. Look, here in Fayette County, we have to have 334 machines.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way ever we're going to use 334 machines on an election day.
Well, we got a couple of questions from you from the audience. Dolores is going to ask you.
Sure.
The first question, if the voting process is so secure, why do some candidates declare their votes count were compromised?
So so there's a difference with me saying the voting process is secure versus what may be happening with election staff. So let's separate the two. If you vote in a machine, your vote is inside of that machine, that vote is secure and it is counted. Now, I can mess that process up by, one, not taking the memory card and counting the vote. I can also mess that process up by, I alluded to this earlier. These voting machines are designed where if you have more than 10,000 votes, 9,999, you have to change out the memory card and put a new memory card in to keep counting the votes. But in between that process, you may have ballots that either one, you didn't count during that process, or it didn't scan through properly. So you have to separate those and count those later. If I forget to count those, then I now have compromised the process.
Mm-hmm.
So if the question for me is, do I believe the voting process is secure? Yes. If the question that is being asked now, do I believe that there is the possibility of error from an election human standpoint in that process that may compromise whether or not a candidate can be confident in their votes? The answer to that could be yes as well. It just depends on what's happening. And again, if there are egregious errors, it doesn't even have to be egregious. That process should be reported to the Secretary of State's office.
Mm-hmm.
The other question, there have been voting disparities or infractions. How are the issues corrected, such as candidates' names omitted, suppression, redistricting?
So as it relates to the candidate's name being omitted, I mean, that's a glaring error. Has not happened here in Fayette County, but if it does happen, a part of our process is to confirm before we ever send our ballots out to be printed, are these the actual names that should be on the ballot? If we don't confirm that, that's a part of that human error. Now let's assume we miss it, because we're all human. We make mistakes, we miss it. The law specifies how you should handle that. It could be, if it's before you start counting your votes, it could be that you post in the precincts that this person's name was missed. Now I get it. For the person whose name was missed, that becomes a legal issue, but you have your legal recourse around that. So there are ways if a person's name is not on the ballot. Obviously, if it's not on the ballot, it's human error. If it's a question around suppression of votes, once again, that is a legislative legal issue. If there are folks out there who are deliberately trying to do things to cause people not to go cast their ballots, like, for example, limiting the amount of time that you may have absentee ballot to be able to vote absentee ballot. For example, not allowing provisional ballots to be done until after 5 p.m. on election day. A lot of people may classify those things as suppression of votes. Another one would be, a electronic error on election day, meaning the voting machine goes down. Some people will classify that as suppression of vote. All of those things, you got your legal recourse around those things. In elections, we don't have the luxury of legislating whether or not an act is the suppression of vote, only to the extent of this. If there's somebody outside of an election precinct with a gun threatening everybody that walks in to vote, we can call the police on them and have them arrested. Mm-hmm. So we can do things that are blatant suppression on election days, but the election office and their staff have no control over what legislators may do that another person may classify as a suppression of the vote. There are laws even around changing a precinct. You can't change a precinct location within 90 days of an election. If you do that, you violated the law, and then you have your election, you have your legal recourse.
Mm-hmm. I have one other. How does the write-in candidate process work?
So the law specify specifically, it used to be years ago that you can write in anybody's name and we had to count it. You can write in Mickey Mouse name, we'd have to count Mickey Mouse got a vote. Today, the law, if you look at those dates for election, in those dates, the law says that here is the last day that somebody can qualify as a write-in candidate. Mm-hmm. So the law is very specific now. It says that I can't just go out and start campaigning and say, hey, look, write my name into the ballot. There's no mechanism to write somebody's name in, per se into the ballot, into the election process, unless you're doing it on your absentee ballot. You can write it in then, but it won't count unless they've gone through the deadline to qualify as a write-in candidate. And then in that process of as a write-in candidate, you have to, your name have to be spelled exactly the way you want it to be spelled and on the ballot. So go ahead, Mayor.
No, let's talk about, you keep mentioning name. One of the things I've seen happen is where, let's say, the governor of X state run for re-election, and one of his people, say Secretary of State, he runs for the governorship, okay? I've seen where people tried to, the opponent had tried to put their title, Governor Jack Jones, all right, on the ballot. And I found out that would not fly for them.
Yeah. Here in the state of Georgia, you can't put titles on there. You can't put like Dr. Hicks. Unless you can put things like if they call me the doctor, I'm not a doctor, but they call me Dr. J. You can use like you've seen where people have put coach.
Yeah.
You've seen where people have done that. And that has gone through the legal process where it says you can do that, but you can't put titles like governor or secretary of state or anything of that nature on the ballot to try to sway people to move to your name. Right. It's illegal.
Yeah, I've heard that. Any more questions for you, Joyce?
Not right now.
Let me switch a little bit and talk about your other responsibilities to the state, and that's with the State Ethics Commission. Talked about talk to me about, as we close, talk to me about what is that all about? What, everybody talk about ethics. Somebody violated ethics, and here's the ethics law, and people read the law and assume what they assume. Tell us a little bit about the elections, state election commission.
So we have 5-member board that's appointed by the governor, and I think the speaker gets an appointment, and the Senate may get an appointment, but I think the governor gets more than they do. That board we call it ethics, but really the only thing that it does is it monitors activities around campaign finance violations. Doesn't have anything to do with your ethics around how you run for office, in the sense of, when you're elected in office, are you calling somebody out of their name, or it only deals with campaign contributions. And so what we do is we monitor and randomly sample campaign disclosures. We monitor campaign activities during elections, whether or not you file your disclosure statements, whether or not you file your personal financial statements, all of those things that are outlined in the law that says that you have to do as a candidate. We monitor that. Whether you are a candidate or an elected official who's doing those things, the state ethics board is responsible for making sure that you comply with the law. For example, if during an election year, you have to file your disclosure statements, which identify your expenses and your contributions, it may be monthly during an election, or it may be quarterly during a non-election. Quarterly during an election. I think it's quarterly. But the closer you get to election, it may be more than quarterly. If you don't do it, and we're not out there looking for you, but if somebody complains about it, then we'll go look at it. Staff will go look at it. And then if there's a violation, we'll bring you before staff. If you work out a compromise, then all it does is come before the board, which I'm one of the members, as a consent agenda, meaning you agreed that you violated or made an error, and you violated and you paid the fine. If you don't agree with it, then you come before our commission and you plead your case. Whether it's you or your lawyer, you say why you disagree with staff recommendation to the commissioners. And as a commissioner, then we hear both sides, and then we render an opinion. That opinion is not the end of the process, because you can appeal the process, but we render an opinion. And if, for example, your fine is $3,000, then you have to pay the $3,000, or you appeal. And then if you fail the appeal process, you ultimately have to pay the fine. Or it could be turned over to the Attorney General, where you could be prosecuted.
Now, these complaints you get, some may be frivolous, but do you vet each one of them and decide which one you want to hear?
Staff determines whether or not it is a frivolous complaint. They've done their investigation. They determine that there's no merit to it, and we never hear it. They could determine that there's merit to it, but we as a commissioners can determine that there is no merit to it, and we vote against it.
Well, that's good. I got to tell you, I'm glad to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you, Mayor. You know I do.
Yeah, well, you've done a lot of good work in both, and our people don't understand. I keep saying this, in both Fulton and Fayette County. You've been a hallmark to a lot of what we've been doing, and we really appreciate you totally down here in South Fulton. And I know you got a special election going on, but that special election because an honorable person died.
Absolutely.
And we don't want to hear that, but Tish and her family want to give our condolences, for the death of Tish. And that election will just, people in Fayette and Fulton will decide what they want to do. I'm in Fayette a lot, buddy. I'm over at the mall. I don't know see none of my Fayette friends over there, but I heard it. But Darryl, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate you. And I think you gave us a lot of good information. And come back again. Let me get you on again and talk about, where things going on
Yeah, weren't you had me on one time talking about economic development. I also chair the board of economic development here in the county.
Well, you know, how many chairmen you gonna be? You know,
I don't know, man. Another
I'm like your
non-paying
wife,
job.
bring another non-paying job in the house. Well, tell your wife I said cheers. I said hello, and
I will.
you tell my good fraternity brother, the mayor, I said hello to him also.
I will do
Okay.
that. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the time, and thank you to your listeners for bearing with me.
Thank you, Darryl Hicks. We really appreciate you.
Take care.
All right. We are the Worldwide Community Empowerment Group, where we speak life into the community. You can subscribe here to our channel, WCEG Network. Like us, follow, and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Before we leave, we would like to just say that the topics and opinions are those of the show hosts and guests, and not WCEG Network. I want to thank you for your continued support. And as always, I want to leave you with this. In all you're getting, please get an understanding. Thank you all so much.